All right, all right. Welcome everybody to a tech exclusive insider series. Let me make sure. Oh, there it is. All right. I need to make sure that all my technology, I'm notorious for making crap just crash on me at all times. So I'm sure we all know the way that works. So, all right. So everybody, again, welcome to tech exclusive. For those of you who know me, give me one second here. So those of you who know me, again, my name is Chris Allaire. I am the founder of Tech Exclusive. Other than that, I'm also the founder and CEO of Eroding, which is the award-winning technology staffing firm. I started Tech Exclusive a handful of months ago, actually, really to build a private network where the best in tech can connect without all the noise, the spam, the sales pitches, real conversations, real relationships, tips, tools, tricks, and really from people that we know and people that we trust. And really kind of that's what it's all about. So a great experience from phenomenal people. So today we've got a very pretty powerful conversation lined up. Our host is Conor Sherman. The topic is the emergence of trust in a world where trust is eroding fast. And this is definitely something that Conor has become an expert in pretty quickly. So for those of you who know Conor, for those of you who don't, Conor is a security leader whose work has really shaped how organizations think about trust, not just in technology, but in the relationships that power it. Currently, he's an executive CISO advisor at CISO. He's led security programs at scale. He's advised countless teams on resilience, knows how to bridge the gap between security and the business. Today, he's going to spend some time and really unpack why trust is such the heart of a short supply, how it's being eroded, what leaders can do to build it back authentically, sustainably. So, Conor, welcome to our Tech Exclusive live series. Thanks so much for coming here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, mate. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's such a privilege to join this, not only just this live stream here, but really just be a part of the extension of your community. I think what you have built there with that exclusive like security technology leadership community, those who are really leading and transforming inside their organizations, it's really great and a great honor to be here as part of that conversation. So perhaps maybe it's a good place just to start with talking about why trust is top of mind. And so the reason that, Chris, we wanted to talk about trust today was simply because when we think about the end of the day, every time there's commerce between two parties, that only happens when both parties believe that the other person is going to hold up their end of the bargain. And as societies get more complicated and technology stacks get more complicated, what we find is that people are looking for something to hold on to know that the other person is going to deliver their end of the bargain. And so in the security world, that has taken its form in the form of security attestations and certifications. So we look to saying, hey, a SOC 2, do you have your basics in place? Or an ISO 27001, do you meet a international standard? Or if you're going to handle the government's data or government adjacent data or be the core of operations, we start to look at FedRAMP, or if you're specific to the DoD, the SRG IL 2, 4, and 5. So we start to look at these certifications. But the reason we want to have this conversation today was because what we're also seeing is that every business is replatforming. They're replatforming from traditional technology, where you have deterministic systems with defined inputs and defined outputs and tons of human oversight, right? You can make the argument that you have a lot of human involvement in building and maintaining and monitoring these deterministic systems. But as we move away from that software delivered businesses or software powered businesses to ones that are oriented around AI, and specifically these agentic capabilities where you have machine intelligence, AI, reasoning, making a decision, and then taking action, the cost to taking action goes way down. So what we're going to see, and as we're seeing now, is the volume of those actions is going up. But then the question becomes, what happens when mistakes are made? What happens when you've replatformed your business onto an agentic system and then it makes a decision that you weren't in alignment with your values personally or your values as a company, what happens then? So just wanted to take a moment to pause and just really to unpack that conversation around security and around trust. And so there are three real pillars that get trust and make trust happen. And that is security. Is the environment free of an adversary? Safety. Is the system that's taking action doing it in a way that is expected, predictable, and explainable within those boundary conditions that have been set? And then reliable. Is the system present? Is the collection of agents, is the whole process going to continue to work and be dependable and reliable, even under adverse circumstances? Historically, we've thought this through the lens of like business continuity or disaster recovery. But what I'm going for here is I'm saying it's not just those big events, but it's also the small ones, right? So often it gets underlooked is that if you have a bunch of third-party services that you've chained together to do this process, are your API keys going to expire? Are you going to go through your tokens? Are you going to get throttled? So on and so forth, right? There's a lot of like smaller technical things, but they can have a really big impact to your business if you're not thinking those through. So as a security leader, we're often the kind of person who steps into the world and says, hey, I see a mess, I'm going to go clean up. So I'm seeing a lot of security leaders when I talk to them, and I'll explain more about that in a second. I'm seeing a lot of security leaders come into this space and they're trying to close the gap because most organizations have not really prioritized all three of those pillars, whether it be security, safety, and resilience. So I'm seeing security leaders start to fill this gap. But I also think what's going to happen is we're going to see other leaders emerge and try and pull this all together. And then there'll be some organizations that'll be large enough and have a high performing executive team where it won't be one person who's accountable for stringing all those three pillars together, but instead it will be some version of a working group, some senior leadership team that handles all three of those pillars. So let's explore this maybe a little farther. Who should be the person who is responsible for these? So if we take the premise that there are three pillars to trust, these three pillars, and the outcome of that is trust, and then your businesses can now interface on each other because they can trust each other. How do you start to unpack those three pillars? And also, who should be the one, as I was alluding to earlier? So a few weeks ago, I was at Black Hat, and one of the privileges that I have in my role is I spend a lot of my time engaging with the executive security community and being able to not only share my points of view, but that's one person's point of view, but most importantly, listen to all the other points of view that are being shared. So in one of the breakfasts that we had, kind of invite only, we have 15 CISOs around the world, global CISOs in the room. And we were having our conversations and we were talking about some of the emerging dynamics, like what does it mean to be a CISO today? And what will it mean to be a CISO in a few years? And again, just to unpack that acronym, that is the Chief Information Security Officer, the executive in charge of the cybersecurity, one of the three legs that I mentioned earlier. So what we're seeing there is there's a belief and a sentiment rising that security leaders who want to continue to be relevant at the executive table and help grow the business are going to have to be business first CISOs. That's always been a requirement, but that's going to get clearer. The second thing is we're probably going to have security leaders who are driving revenue centers as well. And what does it mean to drive a revenue center? That means really to create a service or help shape a product or engage in the product architecture such that you are directly contributing to the top line of the company. So for most of the bell curve of the companies out there, that middle swath, those security leaders in that space are going to find themselves pulled, and they're going to say, do I want to just do security, or do I want to do security in service of growing the business? And the belief around the room was that the winning strategy is going to be a security leader who is managing risk, but is directly tied to creating revenue. So let's go take that one step further. If businesses today are replatforming from deterministic software to agentic systems, this is kind of a perfect opportunity for a security leader to get tied into that company, to get tied into this moment. And so these AI systems, for many companies, their internal operations, But for most, they're actually looking at these systems to say, how do we increase revenue? And then from that, how do we reduce operating costs so we have increased margins? Pretty basic. So as a security leader, don't walk into the room saying, how am I going to protect this AI infrastructure? That needs to be part of the conversation, but shouldn't be all of the conversation. So again, we have security leaders who are leaning towards, how do I help the business adopt this faster, adopt this within the risk parameters set by the company, right? Within the risk tolerance. So if you now have a security leader who is leaning forward and helping the companies grow, not just reduce risk, at the same time that there is this seismic shift from deterministic technology to agentic technologies, then you're in a pretty good space. And you can start to see how that role is starting to shift, right? We're moving away from, do you have compliance? Do you have your program? Are you reducing risk? To you're moving the business forward. So this kind of forward momentum is what I see happening. And I, at the moment, with the data I'm seeing, the conversations I'm having, agree with this trend that's happening here for mid-market or even upper mid-market in the United States. So we're seeing that. Where I think that will mean, though, is as a security leader to hold the room effectively, to truly drive the change that we want to see, there are then going to need to be there's going to be a change in the role and sense of responsibilities. And we're going to go beyond security and start to take over AI safety. And then with AI safety, that is a separate discipline. I think this is really important. I'm just going to linger on that point before I go further. Safety is that ability to operate in an expected way under non-adversarial circumstances, right? When you don't have an adversary in the environment. Historically, we've seen in the tech community safety show up in companies that had large network effect products. So whether this was your DoorDash, your Ubers, your Snapchats, your Facebook, these things that had lots of users on it, and then users were trying to abuse the system one way or the other, whether it's promotion of harmful content or lots of different scams happening on those marketplace applications. And so the safety teams were focused there. But now what I would say is that we're going to use this word, but we're going to have to redefine it and remember that every time we bring it into the room, we're going to use this new definition of like the safety 2.0. And to do this in an AI world, there is an entire discipline of AI safety researchers who have been doing this for 10, 15 years. They were doing AI safety research well before it was cool to rebuild your business on AI. So as a security leader, there is an opportunity for you to recognize where your discipline ends and where the next one begins. That doesn't mean you have to give up the responsibility and at the executive seat of trying to drive this, but just know there are different paradigms, different tool sets, different frameworks that you will use when you're evaluating safety. Now, it's important, and the reason I highlight this is because if you can have the right measurements for each of those disciplines, you're really positioning yourself well as an executive to like lead in these areas. So if you find yourself as a security leader and you're like, or even a technology leader, like a CTO or CIO, but someone who's getting these responsibilities kind of attached to your day job, then I would advise you, don't try and bring your old toolbox to solve a new problem, but go ask people in that industry, like, how are they solving that? And bring in people who have been spending time in particularly the AI safety space. And even if you don't hire them full time, having them on bench, having them as a consultant, having them as an advisor can go a long way to making sure you're spending your time and capital more effectively. All right, so now that we've gone through the security pillars of this, we're getting into the safety pillars of this. Now we get into the reliability. So for a lot of the CIOs in the room, you've been dealing with a version of this for a while now. And that is, again, as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, is around business continuity. In addition to business continuity, it's also disaster recovery. But then there's all of these sub things, right? Most disaster recovery plans that most companies write is they do the minimum viable because they had some compliance framework that said they needed to. And they said, okay, let's build a plan that imagines our data centers are crater, now what? That's actually the simplest solution to solve for, because you have a really clear and explainable situation that just happened. Your data centers are crater. 2, it's a hard cut over, like it's no longer there. So you're going to fail over to, you go from AW East to AW West. And so those kind of like big binary choices are something that I would not find much comfort in if someone presented this to me and said, don't worry, Conor, we are resilient here. We have these plans. And the reason for that is because, again, let's go back to the topic at hand here, which is this replatforming of businesses from deterministic software to probabilistic systems. When you do that, small mistakes are going to happen, and they're going to happen often. I think this is really important to remember. Like, AI is not magic. It's still statistics. Yes, there's a lot more going on there, but like, it's still mathematics. It's still code being executed. And when you have a reasoning system and it reasons, it can reason incorrectly, or what we would say is off the mark. And we've used the language hallucinations. But if you have a 10% hallucination 10 times across 10 different systems, you have a real problem on your hands. And there's actually lots of research paper that's coming out that talks about how when you have agentic systems that work together, the hallucination effect actually is amplifying. And so this is something that researchers are working on. It's like, how do you have the AIs check each other and bring each other back down to earth, for lack of a better phrase. So as you're looking at your content, as your resiliency and the continuity, it's not just of the business unit or like your major tech stack. It's also about the continuity of the small bespoke, the small units, small processes, and checking each one unit along the way. So again, this is now a third pillar of this, which is that reliability. Can I trust that system, not just the aggregate, but all the subcomponents of that as well? So how does one begin to solve these problems? Well, we have that concept of human in the loop, and that's a framework that I think has legs. I think it's an important tool in our toolbox. But I would caution everyone who's listening to this to not be over-reliant on that as an all-in solution. So when we think about human in the loop, most people's understanding of human in the loop ends at the headline title, human in the loop. But actually, there's quite a bit more beneath the waterline when it comes to that iceberg. And I encourage everyone to just actually step aside and go read those papers put out by NIST, read the papers put out by the larger thoughtful institutions on this topic. Because what you'll find is it's not that it's like zero trust. When zero trust came out, it was a strategy. It was a collection of methodologies to solve a problem, but it kind of got marketed to death and it lost its efficacy. So the same thing with human in the loop. If we're not careful, it's going to lose its efficacy as well. So what I would propose is that you need to be building systems to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is today. Today, we do have more companies who are leveraging AI in production, and you'll see different numbers and different statistics coming out, whether it's from KPMG or Deloitte, or pick your thought leader in that area at the time for business transformation, and they'll have their numbers, and they're all slightly different because they're all looking and sampling data from slightly different pools and slightly different regions of the world. But the trend is undeniable. There's going to be more of that. So here's my point. Let's say you took agentic coding, where you have an AI system who's augmenting your engineers in writing their software code. So let's just start with that particular flow, left to right. A poor design of, in my opinion, a poor design of human in the loop is the idea that you want to have a human look at every single pull request, every single change to your code that you want to put to production. And now you need to have a human put eyes on every single one. And where I've seen this to be the worst is when people say, okay, well, I need a security engineer to look at this. I'm like, the sheer volume of pull requests, the sheer volume of code changes, the sheer volume of requested builds or deployments is going to overwhelm any army of individuals you want to throw at it. So that's why I don't think it's a bad thing to have humans looking at these things. I think it's a very good thing. But to say that's where you end the story or your strategy ends, that would be a waste. That would be a waste of time. That would be a failing strategy. So what I would offer to this audience here is, when you are thinking about where do you do and how do you do human in the loop well, it's actually that, again, that classic augmentation. You have well-trained, you have good thinking people who understand governance, but then from a technical expression, and then you're going to bring with it an AI system, which I think this is really important. I have not seen evidence to say that the generalized frontier models are the right tool for the job. My intuition and what I'm seeing come out in research from my experience is that we are going to have train LLMs that are trained to do governance, where you are training it on specifically how do you make sure that the prompt, that the code change that's coming through isn't actually got a comment in it that is a quiet prompt injection that's going to make its way into production. Right. That is a real use case. And I've written about it on LinkedIn, but like that is a real threat that has happened where there's tools used by developers, and somebody put in a comment, pull request, it got merged because it didn't flag any security issues, right? There was no software vulnerabilities in that. It came through to production. And then when the engineers took that latest build and they loaded it on their laptops, guess what happened? The malicious commands were executed. And so we're going to need humans who are trained to look for these things, but we're going to augment them with LLMs that are specifically trained to perform governance, and then we'll be able to toggle them and focus them on different risks and risk thresholds and such. And your human and that AI will do the code reviews together, but the winning solution here is taking that human and training them how to think about the system, how to use systems thinking when it comes to doing all these reviewing all this code. So again, just to kind of pull that thread back together. If you imagine a world in the next 18 months where you are 2, 3, 4 times in X the software changes that are coming in, and they're being written more and more by these agentic coding platforms, that's the trend that we're heading in. So when you think about where's my human in the loop come in, whether from a security perspective or whether it comes from a safety perspective or reliability perspective, and you want to have that human in the loop, like looking at those changes, don't try and throw more people, because you're quickly going to become a bottleneck, and that will have its own consequences. And we've heard that song before. So I think the winning strategy there, again, is take that human, get them really thinking about risk and governance and systems thinking, and then you start to augment them with their own governance LLMs to help them look through that. So that will be one of and that gets you like through the gate. I should complete the thought. It gets you through the gate. Then you can say, okay, this check, it passed all of our checks, we're in place. And then, of course, as a leader in the organization, you should be thinking about these things from end to end. So then how do you actually take those security and safety and reliability concepts and bring them all the way through to production? And then they also maintain there. So again, it's monitoring all the way. It's proactive, dynamic controls all the way. This is where like runtime security is a critical part of the strategy for this. That'll be in place there, so on and so forth. And you can stack those on top. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds at the moment, but just from an approach perspective, that is how I'm thinking that is what I'm encouraging. And that's the conversation I'm seeing. And this is where I think leaders are going to be heading. And so anyone who's on this call or listening this, who later elects to be the person who wants to lead the charge inside the company and help tackle those 3 pillars of security, safety, and reliability, is going to have to think about how do we start mapping out these processes that are going to now be agentic or agentified? And we started to map out those processes. And then we figure out where are going to be those checkpoints along the way. So we're making sure that as the process is executed from start to finish, we have governance checks to make sure they're not going outside our risk tolerance. We have like on target safety checks to make sure that like the thing isn't hallucinating and like going out of bounds. And we're bringing that all the way through. And again, as I've talked about this process, what I haven't spent a lot of time on is talking about like the traditional cybersecurity risks to address here. So on that note, I just want to give just 2 thoughts there. If we go back to like securing these systems, there's a lot that's changing. And so I would offer kind of just 2 large ideas to the audience here. The first is going to be, 1, if you are trying to protect these systems, there's actually a lot of prior art that you can go steal. What do I mean by that? You have now agentic, I'm going to go back to that software example where we're using agentic AIs to write software and create code. Well, again, there's research papers showing that when you look at the code that's being generated by the frontier models as they stand today. They're always changing, but as they stand today, what we're seeing is about 40% of the software that's produced, the lines of code, is vulnerable software, which actually tracks with the amount of, historically, the software that we'd written by humans was about 40% software, was 40% vulnerable, which, again, not surprising. You've taken these LLMs, you've trained it on human written code, they've seen these patterns, and now they're regurgitating that, but at a higher volume. So you are going to need to think about all of those conversations we've been having the last 5-7 years about how you shift left, how you take your technologies and weave them into the systems. Then you should be, like I said, you should be integrating those checks along the way. So that is prior art that you can steal. Someone's writing code, 10xing their code, and there's 40% vulnerable. You should be at the IDE, checking for vulnerable libraries, checking for vulnerable code patterns, telling the engineer. You're doing a pull request, there should be a check, and that's going to line up and be present in the pull request and give the engineer feedback right then. They're going to build their code and they're going to deploy to your cloud environment. Don't let them put builds that don't come from your approved registry, right? You controls both of the build pipelines, and you have that both of the missions controller if you're in a Kubernetes environment. So like lean in more, because the storm is coming and there's going to be a lot more of those traditional vulnerabilities coming through. So when you're tackling the traditional problems at a higher volume, steal the prior art. Don't reinvent the wheel there. On the other side, though, we are introducing a net new AI infrastructure. So we have, like simple things like LLMs. That is a problem set, or a technology set that we didn't really have to deal with 4 years ago. That the market wasn't there. We weren't, as an enterprise, as a culture, as a company, thinking about how do we get those into our products, into our systems. You're going to see a lot more of these. You're going to see a lot more LLMs inside your applications, and they're going to be not just like hosted by the big frontier model providers, but inside your own cloud environments. So each cloud provider service has a service that you can leverage where you load up your own models and you can execute back and forth. That's kind of really interesting. About 50% of LLM deployments in cloud environments are happening in Kubernetes. So you are now taking code off the internet that someone else has written. You are putting it into your production. And so there you are bringing in new technologies with new capabilities, and you have new threats, whether it's something as pickle files that have been compromised in your LLMs, where it takes Python code that is malicious, it gets serialized so you can't see it when it's being statically analyzed. You get into production, and then when you run it, it gets deserialized and the commands are executed. Or again, the front door with LLMs, so on and so forth. You now have prompt injections, you have data poisoning, you club. So these ones, I would say, this is where we should be spending a lot of our time and attention, not just trying to say what is the right product to solve the problem, but who are the right partners, and then how do we, as technology leaders, make sure that we have a deep understanding of how these systems work. Being surface level, even as an executive at a company, is not going to suffice, because it's moving so fast. We are going to have to make sure that we're educating ourselves and going a couple layers deeper and staying close to this technology. Because once you understand the principles of how these systems work, then the expressions of the risks get easier to map and easier to predict. So I just offer that to separate these two. One is going to be, you're going to see more of the same at a greater volume. Steal the prior art, prepare for that. And then with new infrastructure and new technologies, go deeper than reading LinkedIn, go deeper than understanding the headlines, and certainly go deeper than what the marketing team from your favorite vendor is putting out. Find your right partners who are building solutions to help you with your problems, but also spend time understanding the technology so that you can be the executive in the room who is predicting the next set of risks around the corner. So again, Chris, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to connect here today. It's been a really great privilege to be able to speak to your community. You've got such a lovely audience here. And so again, I give it back to you. We've had all three of the pillars that we've walked through. We've talked about strategies on what they can do as leaders to help execute and move forward along this line, and then how to navigate each one of those and make sure that we are showing up as executives in the boardroom and really driving the conversation.
First of all, Conor, that's awesome. That was some pretty deep stuff. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind, to kind of follow up on for you. So you hit on a lot of points, but for the LLM adoption, do you think? Well, do you think LLM adoption should be treated like any other new technology rollout, or does it require a completely fundamentally different risk model?
That's a really good point. That's a really good question, because you could look at the same thing and see two very different things. So I'll tell you Conor's perspective of this. LLMs have introduced new capabilities, and because we have new capabilities, we have new threats, right? So there's a little bit of old, a little bit of new going on here. So here's what I mean by that. Let's start with a little bit of old. LLMs, when you see them and they're being competitively measured, so on and so forth, where are they landing? They're landing on Hugging Face and like platforms. So what we've done, so if you look at that, what you have is you have somebody else's code that they've written on the internet, they've published it, and you're taking someone else's code and you're putting it in your production environment. Okay, so if you've been in this game for more than 2 days, you should realize that's a problem. And as I shared earlier, we have those kind of idea of like those compromised pickle files in there where you've serialized commands that you can't see on static analysis and you can only see them at runtime. Nothing that I said there is particularly unique to LLMs, so that you can steal prior art and you can put really good safeguards in place. So for instance, with the example, the pickle files, runtime security, watch it on execution, have a dynamic analysis happening in production, and then have the capability to take action and protect yourself. That is not new, slight different expression of those traditional technologies, but that's a really important thing to have. But to answer the other part of that side of that coin, it is new capabilities, right? It has the ability to reason. So this opens this brand new door that we have to deal with the last couple of years, and we'll continue to deal with until we re-architect LLMs. And you have prompt injections, right? Can I trick the system? Can I trick the intelligence to giving me back more information or different information than it's supposed to? Can I break authorization boundaries, so on and so forth? And you get all of that with prompt injection. And that's where the introduction of the reasoning capabilities is new capability, new threats, you have new risks to your business. So it will behoove us as technology and security leaders to, whenever we look at a new system like an LLM, we can kind of like pick it up and look on both sides and say, what's the prior art that we can steal from? And then what is truly novel about this? And then go into the technology so that we can become expert as we need to, such that we can predict what are the risks to our business going to be.
What are the conversations you have to have with a CEO or product teams when LLM adoption is on the table?
The first thing is, I find it really helpful to start and anchor the conversations with just some grounding facts, right? So early, I don't think this is as true today as it was 18 months ago, but we definitely saw this 18 months ago, where there was less understanding. There was just more excitement about the promise. And there was this, hey, let's go figure this out along the way. And there's a time and a place for rapid experimentation. There's a time and a place for exploration when you are just exploring because you literally don't know where you're going. That was where the market was 18 months ago. I think we're seeing more engineering leaders and risk leaders come to the table with more of an awareness of what the negative and positive implications of these technologies are going to be. So that said, though, whenever you're having those conversations, ground it in some facts. Do you have the right risk lens that you're looking this through? So if you're talking, I'd offer, so if you're talking to more of a technical team, you can start that conversation with the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs. That's an incredible framework. It's put us in some really great places. My friend Sandy Dunn helped write the thing. If anyone's not following her on LinkedIn, I recommend you do. You can go use a technical framework like that and then unpack that. If you're having more of a business-oriented conversation, there are frameworks put out, I think, by the Cloud Security Alliance, and it's the Maestro framework and such. That is more talking about what is the business impact and what are the layers going to be. And these frameworks help us just start and ground the conversation, not just from a hype, gets us out of the hype and gets us grounded in what is risk. And then we can talk about what are the technical parts of those risks. Once we have that, then you can start to have all the secondary conversations you want to have around risk mitigation. But if you jump into the conversation with like, we need to protect X or we need to stop Y, that's a losing strategy. It's a losing position to be in as a security officer at a company.
You know, it's funny you mentioned because obviously 18 months ago versus 6 months ago versus 2 weeks ago, you know, a lot's changed. If you build systems now, so the LLM infrastructure you put in place today is secure, is it going to be, or I guess, how can it be relevant, or is it even going to be relevant in 18 months, 2 years, 3 years from now?
That's a really good point. The short answer is, I think if anyone tells you they know what the next 12 months is going to look like, you should move on and have the conversation with somebody else, really. It's hard to trust someone who says, this is where we're going, and we have 95% confidence interval. Like, I don't think so. So with that, I will try to tell you where we're going next to go from there. So the principle that we're seeing here is we are in a frontier moment of our industry. We don't know what comes next. It's all changing. A lot of these foundation model companies are dropping breakthroughs every 6 weeks. And so what I would say is today, it's incredibly hard to secure, to use your word, the infrastructure that we have today for AI on the AI ecosystem that we're building out. Classic point examples, like look at the MCP protocol. This had all of this promise to be an incredible way to connect your LLMs to other resources and have it take action. Instantly, we're like, it's not living up to our expectations because version 1 didn't even consider the concept of authentication. And now it doesn't, and it's still struggling with authorization. And so you end up in this world where you have LLMs who are over permissioned, or they're a threat actor with the right type of query can break out of the permissions granted to them. And now they're able to see data in systems that they weren't supposed to see. And then that risk that I just described compounds more and more as you start chaining more of these systems together. But I'll leave that, I'll pause that for a second. So when it comes to building a secure architecture for your AI infrastructure, what I would say to someone is when you're in the room with your peer group, keep the conversation grounded on first principles. First principles are the least shaky thing we have at the moment. It's still, when you start to extrapolate on top of those, that's when you start to find, and we get ourselves into hot water. So again, if we don't know what's coming around the corner, that's understandable, but at least we can make sure we're really having the conversations around identity. Okay, great. Authentication and authorization, data control. Great. Do we have governance and labeling and understanding of where our infrastructure is and the sense of the data is and the sensitivity of that data? And we can kind of walk through each of those types of artifacts. What are the first principles? And then step into whatever architecture makes sense for your team at the moment, but just don't hold on to it too tightly because it is likely going to shift about every 6 months that you need to be there. So again, this is why I go back to saying you don't have to have all the answers, but if you get anchored to first principles, put good partners and vendors in your corner who are kind of doing their best and they're incentivized to look around the corner, I think that can be really helpful and has been a strategy I've used in my previous roles. And then also make sure we've got a peer group internally and externally. We've got really good relationships. If you know your infrastructure is going to shift every 6 months, well, guess what? You better have a really good relationship with the VP of engineering and your general counsel and your fill in the blank, because you're going to be back in that war room every 3 to 6 months.
It was actually really interesting because you talked about like I liked how you put that, where the puck is going, right? Because obviously you've got, I guess what we used to call traditional security risks. And I like the way you say, like, kind of stealing from the art as well. So are the traditional security risks that we've been tracking for decades, are they even relevant in a world being reshaped by AI, or are they going to be eclipsed by a whole brand new category of risk?
Great question. So I would offer this. Let's talk about why we even have cybersecurity in the first place. The reason our discipline exists is because we have threat actors who are trying to do harm and trying to profit themselves, right? So whether it's a nation state level, whether it's organized crime or hacktivism, pick your threat actor level, they have their goals and they are not in your best interests. So the threat actor will continue to always find the fastest and cheapest path to achieve their objectives. So what's going to be the fastest path? It's not necessarily going to be trying to push the limits on a novel feature set out of a new technology stack. Most organizations still take, depending on what research you look at, up to 130 days, most enterprises, I should say, to get their patching cycle complete. Smaller organizations move faster, where they're getting their criticals and highs mostly taken care of within 60 days. All right, that is a problem that has plagued us for a very long time and will continue to plague us until we find better solutions. So again, if a threat actor can just take a proof of concept exploit, load it up and weaponize it and deliver it and get what they want, they don't necessarily need to go after all this new AI infrastructure because they're able to achieve what they want. Another one I come back to is secrets in code. Why would the threat actor ever try and compromise your cloud environment when they can just log in, right? They're not hacking in, they're logging in. So those traditional risk areas, those traditional risks are still very much present. And I'll just expand on the secrets in code for just a moment, and then I'll come back. The secrets in code is one that's really close to me. I always it's one as a security officer who's tried to solve this problem at many companies many times. It's a challenging one to solve for. All that to say that when you look at some of the research that comes out and you're saying, GitGuardian put out a report about this, and they specialize in this particular tech and this particular problem set. And they said, we're going to look at the repositories that are open source repositories. And they looked at those repositories at this body. And they said, okay, which one of them have an AI copilot turned on and which ones have them turned off? Of the set that had them turned off, when you compare them to the repositories where it was turned off, so the ones with the AI agents turned on, they saw 40% more of those repositories had secrets in code. And you're just like, what? This is a problem we're struggling with for 10 years, and we still haven't fixed it. Oh, and by the way, the introduction of these AI copilots made the problem worse, not better. So we're going to see more of the same, where the threats that have plagued us in the past plagued us for a reason. And that was because we didn't have our good safeguards in place. We weren't implementing first principles. We didn't have those hygiene points everywhere. So we're going to see more of that. So I really think it's kind of a not great forecast for security and technology leaders in the future, because we're not going to see less of one and more of the other. I think we're just going to see more of both. We're going to see more risks coming out of traditional technology sensors and traditional threats. And we're going to see a net new infrastructure with all these novel capabilities. And with that, we're going to have net new novel threats as well. So not an optimistic answer, but I think it's probably the right answer. We're going to see more threats, not less.
I think it's the realistic answer.
Yeah.
So, because yes, that's why I've been around for a long time. And I remember days with security were, there's a lot of people out of work. There's a lot of people that are very angry, and there's a lot of people that are, unethical hacking, trying to figure out a way to get stuff done. So I guess one more question, just to kind of to finish off with, if I'm one of the CISO out there and I'm having a one-on-one with you, is there something if you're introducing, going back to the LLM infrastructure for a second, if you're introducing an LLM infrastructure into your company's products and systems, how can you make it a competitive advantage instead of a security headline?
That is really great question there. So let's expand on that. If you're saying a CISO in an organization today sits down, we have a coffee like I do with most people over Zoom, and they're like, hey, we're doing this new project. We're doing this new transformation in the company. We need to make sure that we achieve the stated goal and not be side-railed by security then. Often my answers sound very similar to each other. And that is to remember that it is not your job as the chief security officer to fix the company. It is your job to be clear-eyed about the risks that you are seeing, offer up 2 to 3 potential solutions or pathways that you can explore with your peer group. You don't have to have the whole answer. And then when you elect to say, this is the method by which we're going to de-risk this strategy, you need to execute and do it. Don't talk about it, execute. And you can't get stuck in analysis paralysis. So if we keep that framework, that the job of a security officer is not to start by trying to protect the company, that comes later. You start by being really clear about the risks that are happening. That means we need to be educated. We need to understand the technology. We need to understand our business. We need to understand the confluence of the two and be really clear on those risks. Then we need to put forth solutions. Again, education. We got to understand the technology. What are the capabilities? What are the risks? How are we going to navigate this? Be clear there. And then when you have alignment on risk management, here's how we're going to execute on this thing. No more analysis, no more PowerPoints, no more pontification. You just activate your team or teams and just go do. If you can build that muscle, you will gain so much credibility inside your company because most people can't do that. But if you can truly take that role of the security leader as an executive and do those three things over and over again, you will be in this spot where you're not asking to be part of the come to the table, as we say, but like you are being invited in because the chief product officer, the chief technology officer, general counsel, they're going to want your perspective in there because they know that when you walk them through something, they get to have a point of view on how to de-risk it is, and then off we go. One more thing I would say tactically outside of that more principled framework is I was in Atlanta a few months ago and I had the privilege of speaking to 20 other CISOs in a room, and we were talking about specifically an AI security strategy. And what I offered to them as a way to navigate this incredibly fast changing moment that we're in is what I'm calling the barbell strategy. It's not very creative, but it works. And you have on the outsides and the middle. And what it is you want to have really good visibility on one side. What is this technology stack doing? Where do I have it? Get really good, whether it's on employee use of AI, whether it's your product use of AI. Have the answer to the question when you are asked, what does our exposure look like? You should have an inventory of systems. Really nail that. Then you jump to the other side, and then you have really high fidelity, well-trusted runtime protections. Assume you have a breach. When there's this much speed, complexity, and the interrelation between all of those, you need to assume that something's going to get through and be a bad day. So prepare for a breach. Have detective technology that you rely on and can trust, and then have responsive capabilities that your team is trained on. Do they know how to kill that container that's been compromised? Do they know how to rotate those credentials that are showing anomalous behavior? So on and so forth. Then what you can do is the bit in the middle is you can go use case by use case. Again, those three things I mentioned earlier, and you can do the risks, options, execution. And over that, that's how you build up your resiliency. So to summarize here, if someone's sitting down with me for 30 minutes and having a coffee, the conversation is going to look a little something like that. Get really good visibility on one end across your organization, have really effective detective and preventative controls in production on the other end, and then layer up your resiliency by focusing on the clarifying what are risks, helping co-create the options, and then once you've elected an option to go de-risk it, execute.
Conor, that was awesome. I really appreciate your insights, your clarity. This is definitely a conversation every security leader is talking about. Like, and a lot of the CISOs I know, they're talking about it right now. If they're not talking about it, they obviously need to have this conversation. So again, appreciate for diving in kind of head first. Obviously, if you're watching and you want more discussions like this, obviously just unfiltered with people that are the best in the business, the elite in tech, this is what TechClusive is all about. So, again, Conor, Sherman, thank you so much for coming around. Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody taking a listen today. Again, I am Chris Allaire. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.